Hello and hello and I. Now, today's topic, I'm going to be talking about, does evilness manifest in pale skin, or does pale skin manifest evil? And this isn't me being racist or anything like that, okay? Like, I'm not spreading any hate crime or anything like that. When I've digged in and done further and further research, there's something that I cannot deny. All of a sudden, in the last 3,000 years, okay, pale races come about. As soon as pale races come about, okay, they bring all these different phenotypes with them that are not original to this earth, okay? Yes, Africans or African DNA, African diversity has all shades, has all phenotypes in terms of hair, etc. But the way it dominated and spread and mutated so fast and spread, and it was spread through what? Colonialism. It was spread through conquerors, the steppe people, leaving their region, and they're the ones that had those traits, and spreading across Eurasia. So to me, it makes absolutely no sense how pale races come about as soon as we start writing about history and all of this stuff in their languages, by the way. As soon as written history is in their languages, etc., and they're documenting everything, and they're going around the world burning libraries, etc., and all of these stuff, pilgrimaging places, that's when pale races come about. So we're going to dig deeper into it, okay? Because like I said, to me, it makes zero sense. They say that we was here on earth as Homo sapiens, the way we look now, for 300,000 years. So why on earth is it silence for 300,000 years, and only in the last 3 years is when we see pale races be spoken about in history, etc., etc. Before then, no one's speaking about them. No one's saying they exist. No one mentions the Neanderthal. Nobody even nothing. All their origins, there is no real hard proof tracking towards them, which is very strange, because when you, as Africans, our fossils, our Homo sapien fossils are found all across the world. Americas, Spain, Turkey, Africa, of course, in Asia. We're found everywhere. So why is it that we can't find any European fossils? If supposedly pale skin existed from 30,000 years ago, where are the pale bodies then? Why is it every single body that's dug up is melanated? All right, so evil versus pale traits. Are they evil because they are pale, or pale because they're evil? So case A, pale equals evil. If pale features are engineered traits, then their bodies were literally created with a bias, so fragility, fear of sun, high aggression, low grounding. The evil flows from the physical disconnection. Case B, if they are the evilness equals the pale skin, if the alien or parasite consciousness first seeded itself, its inward disconnect from source manifested outwardly as pale traits: skin, eyes, hair. In this example, pale skin is just the body advertising the inner spiritual severing. So either way, the pale phenotype equals symptom of disconnection. So what I'm basically saying is, it's either pale people are evil because they're pale, or they're evil and that's why they're pale. But I truly believe it's case A, okay? I don't believe it's case B. I believe the pale suit itself distorts the soul, distorts the soul, because obviously it has a more calcified pineal gland as well. You've got to think of these things. Straight hair is less electric conductivity. Curly hair, coily hair, the highest electric conductivity. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Pale skin, you lose, you're not able to take in the sun on the same extent. Melanated skin, you can take in the sun, therefore you're receiving messages from the sun, downloads, etc. So in my feeling, because I know we're all one, right? I know we're all one regardless, I and I is I. So I feel like it's the pale suit that distorts people, and that's why when the pale races come about, all of a sudden you have war. You have all of it. Before then, bro, there was only tribalistic wars and stuff like that and blah, blah, blah. It was never to the point how it was now. As soon as the steppe people got their mutations, which is weird because they were apparently existed before, but it's weird. It's like they switched on as soon as they went pale. All right. Now, so like I said, I don't believe that that pale people are just inherently evil. No, I don't believe that at all. I believe it's their vessel that distorts things for them. That's why they always loop back on themselves. That's why even the spiritual and the healers of them, etc., they never seem to talk about certain things that you would simply expect. Like, hey, if you're getting these downloads or these ancestor connections, how comes you never talk about race? And how comes you never talk about where you lots came from and how you lots got here and all of this stuff? When it's very obvious that science is still trying to piece it all together, or they're trying to piece it all together in a way that it makes sense to us, because they know the more we awaken, the more questions we ask. That's why they come back around, and then they're like, oh no, actually guys, it turns out those Neanderthals we called animal and brutish and dumb, they're smart now. After they find out they share DNA with them. When they said that, oh, all non-Africans have archaic DNA, then all of a sudden, now it's like when they find people digging up, now they're like, oh, everybody has archaic DNA in them. Everybody's a hybrid and all of this stuff. They always change the narrative to fit their story. Anyway, when it comes to Neanderthals, science says lived for 400,000 years in Europe and Asia, so in Eurasia. They say that they are cousins or ancestors mixed with Homo sapiens 50,000 years ago, left behind 1 to 2% DNA in non-Africans. The physical evidence, though, this is what they say, but this is the physical evidence. Almost no skeletons for such a long time. They do have fossils, etc., but like I said, for the length, it makes no sense. No continuous families or lineages into modern times. No Y chromosomes or mitochondrial DNA survived, meaning no direct mothers or fathers carried on. Minimal art or culture, at best disputed as scratches, not civilizations. Isolated tribes like the Senegalese still look African despite being outside of Africa when supposed mixing occurred. So if you look into the Senegalese people, yeah, they are just off of Asia, like the Asian little islands, yeah, off of Asia, and they have been basically uncolonized, untouched, etc. And they look African, okay, proper African. But you're telling me, you said everybody outside of Eurasia got the Neanderthal DNA. That's what you said. You said everyone in Asia got the Neanderthal DNA. Everyone in Eurasia, so outside of Africa, everybody got it. So if everybody got it, why didn't the Sentinelese get it? And why is it the only people that didn't seem to get it, right, are the isolated tribes that haven't been touched? Why is it that? Why is it only the isolated tribes that haven't been touched by your colonialist people or haven't been civilized by your people them that are the only ones that still show the true African phenotypic expression outside of Eurasia, even while the Neanderthals apparently were there? So it proves to me my point again. Africans, we were everywhere. So even when they tried to say, oh, you know, Eurasians, the Asians, like the Melanesians and that are mixed with Denisovans, it's not Denisovans, it's Asian African DNA. So even when they say the ghost DNA and all of this stuff, bro, it's not. That's why they haven't got no fossils for it. Even with the Denisovans, no fossils. Why is that? Because they already know. They cannot admit, when I mean they cannot admit that they were Africans all across this world, because then people are going to start asking deep questions. They say to you, oh, everybody migrated out of Africa, but they make it out to seem like these new races came about long time ago. But no, Ainite, do your research, dig in, and then you'll see the holes in the stories yourself. So science says mutation SLC 24A5 appeared 30,000 years ago in the Near East. So the Near East would be the eastern Mediterranean parts of North Africa and West Asia, okay? So they spread across Europe gradually. Pale skin existed for tens of thousands of years. That's what they say to us. The physical evidence. No pale figures in cave art. The Chavert de Lassault 30,000 years ago, all melanated humans or animals, okay? The Venus figurines 25,000 years ago show African body types, not pale Europeans. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, 5,000 years ago, all art is brown or dark skin. The first clear depictions, is in Egyptian New Kingdom about 3,525 years ago in the 1,500 BCE, with Libyans drawn as fair or light. And that's only 3,500 years ago, not 30,000 years ago, which they like to say that's when the mutation appeared. So science says the EDAR V370A mutation, which came about 30,000 years ago in East Asia, it's dominant in East Asia and Native Americans today. So the EDAR, that gene is for straight hair, okay, like the proper dead straight hair, the one, that's why East Asians, etc., they have dead straight hair with very thick cuticles, which is why their hair doesn't curl as whatever, because it's so thick, the strands, Physical evidence. In early Japanese Jomon, 14,000 to 2,000 years ago, they were dark-skinned, curly or waved hair. Bones and reconstructions, okay, show this. Now, in Chinese Shang and the Zhou dynasty, 1,600 to 256 BCE, it shows straight black hair. First historical appearance, okay? So in Japan, the Yayoi migrants, which was 2,300 years ago, brought straight hair dominance. Again, no 30,000 year art, only 3,000 year records. So they say this mutation started all this time ago. But then there's no evidence of it actually being a thing until recently. And the weirdest thing is the straight hair genes for the Caucasians and the straight hair genes for East Asians are two complete separate genes that apparently started at two complete different times. And yet they both physically manifest themselves in history at the same exact point. So you see black, dark skin, brown skin beings all over the gaff, and even in art, etc., with coily hair. That's why you always see those older statues with the Bantu knots and all of these things, You see all of that. And then all of a sudden, you see straight hair, you see pale skin, you see blue eyes, and all of these new features in the last 3,000 years. Before then, there's no history of it. Very strange, okay? Blue eyes, another one. So OCA2, or the HERC2 mutation, apparently came about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Originated in one ancestor. It spread gradually in Europe. Now, the physical evidence. Ancient Europe up to 5,000 years ago were hunter-gatherers, and they were dark-skinned with brown eyes. The DNA from Mesolithic skeletons. Greek poetry, Homer, 800 BCE, first mentions golden-haired, light-eyed heroes. Egyptian or New Kingdom art, 1,500 BCE. And by the way, if you ever want to work out the BCE thing, if it's 1,500 BCE, just basically minus 1,500 from 2025, which is the year that we own. So 2025 plus 1,500 is about what? 3,075, So 3,075 years ago, the Egyptian New Kingdom art shows blue-eyed Liberians. So first written visual evidence still equals in the 3,000 year window. But supposedly these mutations lasted ages ago. But what I'm trying to say is, isn't it very strange that they all pop up at the same time, and all while history is being recorded, not a moment before? The European blonde hair gene, the KITL gene, apparently, came about 10 to 11,000 years ago. However, the physical evidence, there's no depications of blonde hair until Greek and Roman texts, so 500 BC to 100 CE, describing, so no depictions of blonde hair from 500 BC, so that's about 3,000 years ago, to about 2,500, 600 years ago. There's none describing northern tribes, Celts, Germans, or until then. and they're describing northern tribes, the Celts, the Germans, the Scythians. Now, Egyptian art of Libyans sometimes shows blonde hair. So that was around 1,500 BCE. Not thousands of years old, only a 3,000-year-old in the record. Once again. So the pattern that we see, science pushes origins back tens of thousands of years. The evidence, traits only appear in the last 3,000 years, right as civilizations start writing, drawing, and remembering. But remember, only in their history. That's why I feel like they reset the time. Okay, that's why all of a sudden it's 2025, right? But isn't it strange that everything seems to correlate at the same time? New traits emerge. Those new traits expand and colonize the world. At the same time, those new traits disconnect aren't beneficial for this earth, so it also doesn't make sense as to why they would be there. At the same time, this is when everything's now being written in their languages. For instance, they banned the hieroglyphics and they banned us from speaking our languages and all of this stuff and blah blah blah. So you've got to remember all of that stuff, right? And then when it's in their language that they're writing everything in, boom, that's when everything pops off. Yeah. So this gap, the gap makes it looks like traits were inserted suddenly, then back written into genetic stories to stretch them into deep time. So I've got a question. If pale, straight-haired, blue-eyed people were really here for 30,000 years, why do they only show up in art, text, and history 3,000 years ago? So, the silence in the art and history. If pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, and straight hair really existed 30,000 years ago, we would see them in ancient cave paintings, idols, or early records. Bear with me a moment. Let me just make sure this is recording. Okay, yeah, we should be good to go. All right. But until 3,000 years ago, every depiction is melanated, curly, with wavy hair, brown eyes, okay? Suddenly, in Egyptian art, Libyans, so 1,500 BCE, Greek poems, 800 BCE, Chinese Azal art, 1,000 BCE, pale, straight-haired figures appear fully formed. That gap suggests a reset moment rather than slow spread. The carrier sweep feels engineered. These traits come from tiny groups, then explode across whole continents unnaturally fast. Blue eyes came from one ancestor 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Now millions have them. The SLC24A5 pale skin from one ancestor 30,000 years ago. By the Bronze Age, most Europeans carried it. Ida straight hair from one ancestor 30,000 years ago, now fixed in almost all East Asians and Native Americans. Natural selection usually works slow and uneven, but this looks like a deliberate override. And how I can explain that is look at the Melanesians and their blonde hair, okay? So, Melanesians have blonde hair, but did you see their blonde hair all of a sudden spreading all across Asia? And this is why these things are strange. Aren't there loads of albinos in East Africa, especially Tanzania? Did you see the whole of Africa turning into albinos? That's what I'm trying to get you lots to understand. Like, yes, all traits exist within us. Straight hair, all of that stuff. If you see wavy hair, etc., all of that stuff, all of those phenotypes already exist within African genetics. My issue is, why the sudden mutation and why so fast and why in the isolated parts of Eurasia? Why is it Eurasia? Why wasn't it the whole world? Africa has the highest diversity, with the highest diversity in climate as well. We've got snow in freaking Lesotho. Is it Lesotho in South Africa? We've got snow there. There's even freaking, you go skiing and all of them things there. Constant snow. Why didn't the people there turn pale? With straight hair and blonde hair and blue eyes. They were there for ages. Don't think that they're slaves, because they always love to say that. As soon as you see black people in ancient times, they're like, oh, they came from slaves, some form of slave. No, I look into your history, dig deeper. So, natural selection usually works slow and uneven, but this looks like a deliberate override. So, original humanity, African coded template. Around 3,000 years ago, new phenotypes appear almost everywhere outside of Africa. Europe, pale skin, blue eyes, blonde hair, visible in art and writings. East Asia, straight, thick hair, pale skin, dominant by the Yayoi period. African template, 300,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago. For nearly all human history, everyone was melanated with African features. Early art across the world, rock art, figurines, cave paintings, always shows dark skin and curly woolly hair. Example, European Venus figurines 25,000 years ago are depicted with a full-figured African phenotypes. No evidence of pale, blonde, or straight depictions yet. The first carriers, but still invisible, 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. Genetics claims SLC24A5, the EDA gene, the OCA2 mutations existed. So these are the blue eyes, straight head in East Asians and the pale skin, yeah, but existed. But archaeology and history shows no proof in culture. Ancient Egypt, as early as 3000 BCE, depicts brown skin, dark skin across classes. No pale or straight-haired Europeans or East Asians appear in art. In Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, figures are dark-haired, brown-skinned. So even if the alleles existed, they were isolated and not visually dominant yet. So the first documented pale or light traits, 3,000 years ago. Indo-European migrations from the Yamanya and the steppe people, 3000 BCE, brought carriers of light skin, blue alleles into Europe. This matches when we first start to hear about fair versus dark people in myths, so the Greek and the Vedic texts. In ancient art, Egyptian tombs, New Kingdom 1500 BCE, depicts Libyans with pale skin and light eyes. First clear sign of European-like phenotype in history. This is the earliest evidence of European-looking people recorded visually. So the first pale skin carriers became visible to history 3,500 years ago. The East Asia and straight hair. 3,000 to 2,000 years ago. Jomon, Japan, 14,000 to 2,000 years ago. Art and skeletal reconstructions show dark-skinned, wavy or curly hair. The Yayoi migration, 2.3 thousand years ago, brought East Asian straight hair Ida dominance into Japan. Chinese art, so the Chang and the Zhou dynasties, 1600 to 2005-6 BCE, begins showing straight-haired figures but still with brown skin tones. This is when straight hair becomes a visible dominant phenotype in East Asia. So the Europe in the classical era, 2,500 to 2,000 years ago. Greek and Roman art, 500 BCE to 300 CE, depictions of blonde appear in writings. Homer mentions golden-haired heroes. Roman writers describe blue-eyed northern tribes, so the Celts, the Germans, the Scythians, as exotic and unusual. This is when light traits are not just the genetic whisperers, but recognized cultural differences. So European phenotype becomes documented in text and art around 2,500 years ago. Now, the medieval times, the medieval consolidation, 1,500 years ago to 500 years ago. By the time the Middle Ages, European art consistently depicts fair skin, blonde or red hair, blue or green eyes as normal phenotype. In Asia, Chinese and Japanese art consistently show straight black hair and pale to olive skin by this time. This is when the phenotypes solidify into today's racial categories we recognize today. The missing ancestors problem. The claim versus the record. So science says pale, light, straight-haired humans have existed for 20 to 30,000 years. Okay? Mutations are dated genetically. But the records show the oldest burials, mummies, and depictions are overwhelmingly melanated. When pale, and this is what's strange for me, This is how you know they try to write themselves in history. Because why did they paint everything in Egypt? Everybody thought, oh, they're just cutting off noses and they're just in this or whatever because they wanted to take over the lands as colonized. No, they did all of that because they wanted. Because remember, Egypt had already started writing in history and documenting their history and whatever. Egyptians had already been doing all of that. So they wanted to push themselves into history, because if they haven't documented them, if they haven't spoken about them, etc., etc., then where were they? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? They wanted to make it look like their lineage is as ancient as ours, but it's not. Okay? So when pale or straight-haired bodies finally appear, it's only within the last 3,000 years. This gap is massive. Tens of thousands of years where their ancestors are supposed to be, but aren't. Civilizations and art. If pale or straight or light humans have been around for 20,000 years, where are their villages, their temples, their art, their myths and graves? Where are, from 15,000 to 10,000 to 8,000 years ago, why do all the great early civilizations, Egypt, Nubia, Sumer, Indus, Olmec, depict dark-skinned peoples in their art and not pale ones? The first time pale or light-skinned figures show up in art is in the Egyptian New Kingdom with the pale Libyans, the Greek poetry with the blonde or light-eyed warriors, the Zhou dynasty with the straight-haired East Asian phenotype. If they existed since 30,000 years ago, why the silence until 3,000 years ago? So, the mummy record. Egypt. All pre-dynastic and old Middle Kingdom mummies are melanated and dark-skinned. America's, the oldest mummies, the Chinchorro 7,000 years ago, Peru 2,000 years ago, dark-skinned melanated features. China, Tarim Basin 4 years ago. Even here, the mystery mummies, like the blonde-haired ones, date only to 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, not 30,000 years ago. Europe, Mesolithic Europeans 8,000 years ago, DNA tested, dark skin. And the maddest thing is they want to say, oh, those like the Cheddar Man and all of these stuff, the Europeans that went in England and Spain and all of these stuff were apparently dark skin with blue eyes. But look how rare blue eyes is. Blue eyes still isn't that much of a thing now. Look how rare blue eyes is now, even amongst European people. And then you're trying to tell me that the two skeletons that you lot dug up, they happen to be the two skeletons that are dark skinned with blue eyes? It makes no sense. Do you know what they're doing? Yet again, trying to tie themselves into history. So because they figured out, look, everybody was dark skinned. They're trying to make themselves make sense. Well, they must have been dark skinned. Okay, fair enough, they were dark skinned. But they must have had blue eyes, which is why they started off black, then they got blue eyes, and then they went from black and blue eyes to white and blue eyes. It makes sense. They tried to, like... Well, you, man, don't piss me off, yeah? I'm telling you, it makes no sense. What a coincidence, I. What a coincidence that the fossils they dig up happen to be the ones that are dark skinned with blue eyes. When they also mention it them times that the blue eyes genetics, even in them times, wouldn't have been common. So how is it, like, do you understand what I'm saying to you? Anyway, the oldest preserved humans on Earth are melanated. Pale or light ones only appear suddenly and recently. So the oral traditions and memory. In indigenous peoples across Africa, Australia, the Americas, all have deep oral histories stretching back tens of thousands of years. They describe migrations, floods, stars, but no ancient stories of pale straight-haired people in their midst before recent historical time. The first stories of fair invaders come only in the Bronze or Iron Age. Indo-Europeans described in India as fair Aryans. Greek Romans described northern pale tribes. Egyptians show Libyan sea peoples with pale features. And by the way, all those people, they all have traces and all originate from the steppe peoples, the one region that had all those traits and expanded and colonized the whole of Eurasia. Guys, please do the freaking history. Not just Eurasia, but Northern Africa and all of that stuff as well. And all their lineages, all their ancestors went to colonize the whole world as well. Even when it comes to the Jewish people that you see now that are saying that aren't the real Jews or whatever, but you know what I mean, them ones, yeah, that, you know, they're fighting for apparently their land in Palestine, all this stuff or whatever. Those people, guess where they come from? The steppe people that were there, the ones yo, when you look at, so how is this all coincidences? Please tell me how this is all coincidences. Okay, so again, no deep time presence. They arrived suddenly as foreign newcomers. So the official scientific version: pale skin mutations SLC SLC24A5, SL45A2 arose 30,000 years ago in the Near East or Europe. Blue eyes mutations OCA2 or HERC2 appeared 6,000 to 10,000 years ago in Europe. The straight hair EDAR gene appeared 30,000 years ago in East Asia. The blonde red hair gene is the KITLG gene, arose 10,000, mutation by the way, not genes, mutation arose 10 to 11,000 years ago in Europe. The Rh negative blood appeared 20,000 to 30,000 years ago in West Asia. So they always say that all of their things are 30,000 years ago. And I have a feeling that the reason why they say it's 30,000 years ago is because of something. Some science, etc. doesn't line up, right? So they have to keep saying 30,000 years ago. But it's not 30,000 years ago, like I said, it's 3,000 years ago because they weren't ever depicted in anything, okay? Anyway, these traits spread slowly over thousands of years through natural selection and drift. Neanderthals and Denisovans contributed some of these adaptive alleles through mixing 50,000 years ago. This is what they say. The story: all races are the product of slow natural changes over tens of thousands of years. But for some reason in Eurasia, they had all these... Oh, that's why they say 30,000 years ago. Now I remember, because obviously they want to say it happened all after the Ice Age. But remember, these mutations only appear in the last 3,000 years in a dominant effect. So how the hell did it happen after the Ice Age 30,000 years ago and they weren't appearing? They also like to say that they came from the Neanderthals, from the archaics, right? But if they came from them when they mixed 50,000 years ago and went extinct 40,000 years ago, why did they only show up recently? Why again is there that big gap? So either way, if it's the Ice Age, why didn't the mutation start straight away? If it's the Neanderthals, why didn't the mutation start straight away? The coincidence that break it, the art silence. For 20,000 years after these traits supposedly appeared, no art or records show pale or light people. All cave art idols and early depictions are of dark or melanated features. The first pale or straight depictions are from 3,500 years ago, for the Egyptians, the Libyans, with the Zhou dynasty, the Homeric Greek, Homeric Greek. The activation paradox. If pale or straight people existed for 20,000 to 30,000 years ago, why did they remain invisible in archaeology or art? Why did they suddenly appear only in the Bronze Age? Why did they begin immediate expansion and colonialism the moment they appear? Why? Why didn't they just take time and settle down? What were they waiting for? Okay? Because in my head, it's like, why did they only... If they were already existing, what were they waiting for? It's like they were waiting for somebody to hit record. It's like as soon as they said, okay, guys, now, action. We're going to write all in history now. You lot pop up. They brought out all these extra new characters. Like, what? The synchronization problem. European, pale or blonde or blue eyes, Asia, straight hair, and North Africa, pale Libyans, all show up in the same 500 to 1,000 year window, 3,000 years ago. If traits arose separately 10 to 30,000 years ago, why did they all suddenly become visible and dominant at the same time? Why is it? And then what they wanted to say is, oh, because people weren't writing about history before then. But they were speaking about history. They just weren't writing it in your languages. They were depicting it in art and sculptures and all of that stuff. They just weren't doing it in your ways. So people were recording it. So the Neanderthal echo, okay? Neanderthals lived 400,000 years ago alongside humans for 250,000 years. Did little culturally, then suddenly they hybridized and went extinct in the final 5,000 years. So Neanderthals apparently are older, right? They were living on the planet for 400,000 years in Eurasia. alongside the Homo sapiens for 250,000 years in Eurasia as well. But for some reason, they didn't mix, they didn't hybridize. Yeah? But in the last 5,000 years leading up to their extinction, they decide, hey, we're going to mix with you guys. But they only mix one way. Only the Neanderthal men going into the African women. Also strange. And after 5 years of doing this, they all of a sudden go extinct and they vanish. Not passing down any mothers and not passing down any fathers. It's very strange indeed. All they did is pass on genomes, specific genomes. The specific, very specific genomes that show up in all non-Africans outside of Africa. If it was truly mixing in the normal way as in sexual, it would be different genes showing up in different places. But it's exactly the same specific genes showing up. Very strange. So the same suspicious pattern. Long silence, then a sudden last-minute impact, then a disappearance. The expansion coincidence. Pale or light groups don't just appear, they instantly expand. Indo-Europeans, they sweep into Europe, India, and Iran. The Zhou dynasty consolidates in China. The Libyans or Sea peoples invade Egypt. No evidence of them being passive for 20 to 30,000 years. Only sudden aggressive expansion. So the reset model. If Africa equals the template. So this is one of the models I've come up with, yeah. One of them. Because I keep... It's so hard to... When you're using their science, their history, and their numbers and all of this stuff to find truth, and then you're using your intuition and your downloads, it's hard. Because their shit just doesn't add up. And then you're trying to make sense with the information that they're giving to you, but then it's hard. Do you get what I mean? So this is one of my theories. Africa equals the template. All humans looked African, dark skin, curly, or wavy hair for 90% of history. Africa had natural variation. Wavy hair, albinos, blonde, Melanesians, etc. But melanin dominance kept these traits rare. The steppe equals the reset hub. Around 3,500 years ago, the Pontic Caspian steppe Caucasus acted as the launch pad for new suits. Pale skin, blue eyes, blonde or red hair, Rh negative. These groups expanded explosively into Europe, Asia, and into Africa. The activation point equals the Bronze Age. Around 1,500 to 1,000 BCE, pale people appear in art. Written histories, Greek, Vedic, Biblical, Zhou, begin. Colonization and denomination accelerate. This is the real birth of pale races, not 30,000 years ago, but just 3,000 years ago. The reset verdict. The official story is a cover-up. Pale or straight light traits were not ancient. They appear suddenly 3,000 years ago, already tied to expansion and colonization. The backdating 30,000 years ago and 400,000 years ago for the Neanderthals is just a narrative stretch to hide the fact that they were inserted resets. The timing problem. Why wait and then pounce? Neanderthal paradox. They claim Neanderthals lived 400,000 years ago, side by side with Homo sapiens for 250,000 of those years. But for all that time, they barely left culture, no explosive impact, no domination. Then in the last 5,000 years of their existence, they suddenly interbred with human women, gave us some traits and then went extinct. And not us, because I'm melanated, but you know what I mean? If they were truly dominant for so long, why wait until the very end to make their move? It looks more like a story patched in reverse to explain why their traits are in non-Africans without explaining their sudden disappearance. The pale race paradox. Pale skin and light traits existed 20 to 30,000 years ago, but no sign in art, history, or archaeology for 20,000 plus years. Then suddenly, around 3,000 years ago, they appear in the record, already expanding, colonizing, and dominating. If they were really there for 30,000 years, why did they only begin to act when history was being written? What were they doing for 27,000 years? Hiding in caves? Like, bro, what were these men doing? Waiting for someone to start recording. You know what I'm saying? Oh, let me see if this is still recording. Okay, perfect. Guys, we're still in a row. So the coincidence problem. The exact same moment, okay, that pale or light or straight races appear in history is also the moment they begin expanding aggressively, begin colonizing other melanated peoples, begin writing their histories and myths, Greek, Vedic, Biblical, Zhao Chinese. I'm probably saying the Zhao part really wrong, by the way, so allow me. This is way too convenient. It looks like a slow Asian existence, and it looks less like a slow Asian existence and more like a reset insertion. Pale phenotypes appeared fully formed along with their own histories and expansion drive. The cover-up pattern. With Neanderthals, science backdates them 400,000 years, so their sudden last 5,000 years impact looks less suspicious. That's what they do, okay? So with the pale races, science backdates their mutations 20 to 30,000 years, so their sudden last 3k years of dominance looks less suspicious. Are you seeing the pattern? Both are the same narrative trick. Stretch the timeline backwards to hide the fact that these groups only activated suddenly and recently. Strange scientific facts about human origins. Pale skin is brand new. Ancient DNA shows that Europeans as recently as 8,000 years ago were dark-skinned with blue eyes. Pale skin mutations only became widespread in the last 3 to 5,000 years. Strange, because if pale skin existed for 30,000 years, why were Europeans still dark until so recently? Blue eyes came from one ancestor. Every blue-eyed person alive today can be traced to a single mutation 6 to 10,000 years ago in the Black Sea region, Bulgaria, Georgia, Romania, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine. That means one ancestor's eye color spread across millions of people. Strange, because if it was just a random mutation, why did it take over so unnaturally fast? Straight hair has two separate origins. East Asia, Mongolian straight hair, and then you've got the European straight blonde hair, okay? So the Mongolian one has black thick hair and the European one is the fine light hair. Strange, because the world got two different straight hairs from two completely different genetic changes, but both spread globally around the same time frame. The Rh negative blood shouldn't exist. Rh negative is caused by the deletion of an entire genome, which is the Rhd. Normally, such a deletion would vanish, too harmful, but somehow it survived and concentrated in West Eurasia. So the Basque, which is the straddling between the border of North Spain and southern West France, and then in the western Pyrenees Mountains and Caucasus region, which is parts of the southern Russia, as well as countries like Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And the funniest thing is you'll see the same countries come up because it's the same region. Strange, because it causes pregnancy complications. So why wasn't it naturally eliminated? So human traits don't match environment. The Inuit live in extreme cold but stayed brown skinned. The Neolithic Europeans lived in weak sunlight for 20,000 years but stayed dark until 3,000 years ago. The Adenum Islanders lived in intense sun but still have straight hair. Strange, because the environments don't line up with the traits. So, found a mutation spread unnaturally fast. Blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, all traced back to single ancestors, not multiple random events. Yet these traits spread across continents in just a few thousand years. Strange, because in small populations, most mutations die out. They don't dominate whole continents. The Neanderthal DNA puzzle. Neanderthals supposedly lived 400,000 years ago, but no mitochondrial DNA, no mother line survived, no Y chromosomes, no fathers survived. Only tiny scraps of DNA in non-Africans remain. Strange, because that's not how cousins leave an imprint. It looks more like selective trait harvesting, not true ancestry. The fossil gaps are also too big. Neanderthals lasted 400,000 years ago, but only left a few hundred fossils. Denisovans lasted 200,000 years plus, but are known for a single pinky bone and a few teeth. Strange, because if these were thriving populations, where are their remains? The synchronization of the mutations. Pale skin in Europe, straight hair in Asia, blue eyes in Caucasus, all appear around the same historical window 3,000 years ago, all in the same region as well. Strange, because if these were random independent mutations, they shouldn't all activate at once globally. Each of these admitted scientific findings point to the same hidden truth. Traits didn't emerge naturally over 30,000 years. They appeared suddenly from a few founder events and spread unnaturally fast. They don't match environment or survival logic. They show up in history at the exact same time that pale or light races appear and begin colonizing. So, just a few suspicious history truths, okay? Dark Europe. Ancient Europeans up to 8,000 years ago were dark-skinned. DNA confirms. The first pale or light Europeans appear only 3,000 years ago. Why did European art or myth suddenly shift to glorify blonde or blue-eyed people exactly when the steppe invaders arrive? The Libyans in Egypt. Egyptian New Kingdom art shows Libyans with pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. Before that, zero depictions of pale people in North Africa. Why do pale or light traits appear suddenly in Egypt just as the Indo-Europeans are expanding? Aryans in India. The Vedic texts describe fair-skinned Aryans arriving and subjugating dark Dasas. Before that, Indian art or art culture equals melanated Dravidian base. Suspicious. Why does India's caste or colour system emerge at the same time the fair Aryans arrive? Greece golden-haired heroes. Now listen to this. Homer describes blonde and light-eyed warriors, yet the Mesopotamian Greeks, so the earlier Greeks, were melanated Mediterranean peoples. Did the steppe migrants overwrite native Greeks and then rewrite myth to glorify their phenotype? Because even when they say, those times, it was black people in Greece those times, so they literally rewrote our whole history. So, then the Zhou dynasty in China, the Zhou, replaced the Shang and promoted the mandates of heaven. They are depicted with straight hair, East Asian features, while all older depictions of early Chinese ancestors look broader featured and darker. Did a new phenotype reset Edo carriers seize power and rewrite the divine right to rule? So, like I say, Anna, the deeper you go into history, the more you search, the more you'll realize that things don't make sense and things don't add up. And I genuinely believe that we have been tricked and we have been scammed, right? And they have created a separation with amongst ourselves. And I'm gonna go deeper into it, but I feel like I've gone long enough now. So if you love and enjoy, my videos, or you enjoy this video, please like, comment, share, all of that good. Subscribe, don't forget to subscribe, guys. And I literally am obsessed with finding out the truth as best as I can. Please do your own research, like I said, but I appreciate you so much, and I love all. I.